उसी से रियल टाइम व्यू और बैच व्यू दोनों चल रहे हैं उसी डेटा से, वो जिस तरह से डेटाबेस में जा रहा है। जिसको क्वेरी करना है उससे क्वेरी कर ले, इवेंट रीरन करना है किसी पुराने इवेंट पे जाके रीरन कर लें, सारे काम एक साथ सीध में होते हैं। आगे जाना सर भाई। तो ये भी एक छोटी सी स्क्रीन है कि भाई डेटा जो आ रहा है, असल में जो पॉइंट है बिग डेटा में वो ये है कि डेटा आ डिफरेंट सोर्सेस से रहा होता है। जैसे गूगल मैप है, वो बता रहा होता है रोड क्लोज हो गई, यहाँ पे ट्रैफिक ज़्यादा है, तो गूगल मैप के कोई गूगल के बंदे नहीं खड़े होते वहाँ देख रहे होते हैं कि यहाँ पे रोड बंद हो गई है या ट्रैफिक ज़्यादा है। एक्चुअली वो हमारे मोबाइल फ़ोन ये जो फ्री एंड्रॉइड दिया उन्होंने, उसके लोकेशन डेटा से उठा के और जीपीएस के सेंसर की बेसिस पे आइडेंटिफाई कर रहे होते हैं कि ये जीपीएस यहाँ पे स्लो मूव कर रहे हैं, यहाँ पे कंजेशन ज़्यादा है, और उस डेटा को रियल टाइम पे प्रोसेस कर रहे होते हैं। तो ये भी यही बता रही है कि कुछ डेटा आपके डेस्कटॉप से आ रहा है, कुछ मोबाइल डिवाइसेस से आ रहा है, कुछ सेंसर से आ रहा है, कुछ स्पेशल डिवाइसेस से आ रहा है जो आपके रिस्ट वॉचेस हैं, आपके स्मार्ट वॉचेस हैं, आपका पल्स रेट मॉनिटर कर रही हैं, हार्ट रेट मॉनिटर कर रही हैं, आप भाग रहे हैं, दौड़ रहे हैं, खड़े हुए हैं सुकून में, इस तरह। तो ये सारा डेटा आता है, स्ट्रीम में आता है। स्ट्रीम में कुछ प्राइमरी जॉब्स होती हैं जो उसको फॉरन प्रोसेस कर रही होती हैं, कुछ रीप्रोसेसिंग जॉब्स होती हैं। वो डेटा आके एक अपेंड ओनली डेटा स्टोर में जाता है। ये अपेंड ओनली डेटा स्टोर का कॉन्सेप्ट सिमिलर टू बफर कॉन्सेप्ट है जो पुराने ज़माने में सी लैंग्वेज में होता था कि अगर दो एप्लीकेशंस आपस में बात कर रही हैं और दोनों की स्पीड इनकम्पैटिबल है, तो वो क्या करते थे, बीच में एक बफर या एक मेमोरी स्पेस बनाते थे, उसमें डेटा एक सीध में अपेंड ओनली फॉर्म में डलता जाता था और दूसरा उसको रीड करता जाता था, जिस तरह से सीडीज वगैरह रीड होती थी। तो वो डेटा इसमें अपेंड ओनली स्टोर में आ गया, हमारे पास डेटा परसिस्ट भी हो गया। अब उस डेटा के साथ आगे एप्लीकेशंस जो हैं वो उस डेटा की जो कंज्यूमर एप्लीकेशंस हैं वो उस पर रिपोर्ट्स रन कर सकती हैं, सर्विसेज रन कर सकती हैं, मतलब सर्विसेज चल रही होंगी जो उस डेटा को उठा के कुछ काम कर रही होंगी, उस डेटा पे कोई बिजनेस इंटेलिजेंस लग रही होगी, एनालिटिक्स लग रही होगी, उस डेटा की बेसिस पे नोटिफिकेशन जा रही होंगी कि जनाब यहाँ पे कंजेशन है, आप यहाँ पे जाके मतलब मैप पे अपडेट कर दें, इन लोगों को नोटिफिकेशन भेज दें, यहाँ नहीं जाएं, वगैरह वगैरह। आगे जाएं। तो ये जल्दी जल्दी था कैपा आर्किटेक्चर, क्योंकि इंट्रोडक्शन बहुत बड़ा था। एक क्वेश्चन आया, और क्वेश्चन? नहीं प्लीज, वी आर हियर। नहीं, हम हैं इसीलिए ना।
मल्टीपल स्ट्रीम्स है, मल्टीपल सोर्सेज है, जहाँ से जो है वो आप लोगों के पास जो है वो डेटा आ रहा है। दे देंगे जवाब, ठीक है। लास्ट प्रेजेंटेशन में डिस्कशन कर रहा था, साहब ने जो है वो बड़ा अच्छा पॉइंट यूज किया था कि क्या जो मेरे पास और सिस्टम है रियल टाइम सिस्टम चल रहा है, इसके लिए मैं सिक्योरिटी करूँगी यहाँ पे, मैंने वहाँ पे कैसे यूज किया, स्कोप नहीं था तो 3 घंटे 4 घंटे की प्रेजेंटेशन करेंगे, इंटरेस्टिंग टॉपिक। रियल टाइम डेटा प्रोसेसिंग बिग डेटा का चैलेंज है। लार्ज अमाउंट ऑफ डेटा सेट हमारे पास ही मौजूद है और दूसरे यहाँ पे बिग डेटा से जो हमको अप्लाई है
इसमें भी अगेन कॉन्सेप्ट बिग डेटा है। बिग डेटा है क्या, ये वो सही डिफाइन नहीं हो पाता। क्या 100 MB बिग डेटा है, तो 100 MB भी बिग डेटा है। इसके लिए ईमेल सिस्टम के लिए आपकी ईमेल में अगर अटैचमेंट 100 MB नहीं जा सकती, अब उसके लिए 100 MB बिग डेटा है। तो अगर आपके कोई सिस्टम है जो हैंडल नहीं कर सकते डेटा को, तो वो डेटा आपके सिस्टम के लिए बिग डेटा है। अगेन प्रॉपर्टी सिर्फ दो ही, इनफाइनाइट डेटा और एंडलेस डेटा। आएगा ये सारी चीजें आएंगी, सिनेरियो आप खुद बनाएंगे।
अब आप वहाँ पर कपड़ा यूज करना चाहते हैं। मैंने आप लोगों को चैलेंज क्या मुझसे जो वो बिग डेटा एनालिटिक्स के लिए जहाँ पर बिग डेटा के ऊपर एनालिटिक्स परफॉर्म करें, मैं वहाँ पे जो हम लोग यूज कर रहा हूँ या आप लोगों के पास भी चैलेंजेस हैं, तो आप लोग 5 दिनों के अंदर क्रिएट कर रहे हैं अपनी एप्लीकेशन पर। आपके पास मिलियंस ऑफ रिक्वेस्ट जो हमको 1 सेकंड के अंदर आएगी और आपका सिस्टम उसको किस तरीके से जो है वो रिजॉल्व करें और आपको रिस्पॉन्स भी देगा। कैसे डिसाइड करते हैं इम्पोर्टेंस को, या आप चीज़ों को प्रोसीजर है ना, आप नहीं ले सकते। बिजनेस बताएगा कि मुझे कौन सा रिस्पॉन्स जो है वो रियल टाइम में चाहिए और कौन सा रिस्पॉन्स है जिसका इंतजार कर सकते हैं। तो जब ट्रांजेक्शन है
कहता है ये डेटा 5 सेकंड लेट हो जाए, तो 5 सेकंड बाद दिख जाए, 10 सेकंड बाद दिख जाए, जो भी बैच का टाइम है। तो कहते अगर 10 सेकंड बाद चल रहा है और वो उसको प्रोसेस कर रहा है डेटा को, 10 सेकंड से कोई आगे तूफान नहीं आ रहा है,
जमा होता जा रहा है बात है ना मेरे पास आगे भी और आप कोई आपको रियल टाइम में जो चीज है वो तो कुछ कर जब भी आप बात कर रहे हैं तो आप जो है किसी वजह से सर्विस चलती है।
Assalamualaikum everyone. आवाज आ रही है सही? Good. पीछे आवाज आ रही है? दूसरे नजर आ रहे हैं. ठीक है. Good. Assalamualaikum everyone. And welcome to the third talk, third talk of our software architecture meetup. I'd like to thank Ali Bhai and Asad Bhai for giving me this opportunity to come here and share this topic today. The important thing is that actually I don't have any experience with micro-frontends to date. मेरा जो आज जो जितना भी आपको मैं share करूँगा, this is research that I've been doing for my own projects over the last 2-3 months, and I've learned quite a few things, and I thought that, you know what, this needs to be shared. इसका एक perspective है. Let's get this out there so that people start learning about what this thing is and how can we go about implementing that. In the introduction we're talking about quotes. तो ये मैं जल्दी से कोड डाल दिया मुझे ये मैंने भी कलेक्ट करता हूँ कोड्स को तो ये मेरे पास पड़ा था डेस्कटॉप के ऊपर and I think this kind of works with the topic today. I've yet to see any problem, however complicated, which when you look at it in the right way did not become more complicated. And today we'll see one of those examples, I think. So as introduced, my name is Mashood and I'm leading the engineering team at Sustatica.pk. It's a startup where we're focusing on travel tech. Besides that, I'm actually, I call myself a web evangelist. So essentially anything that belongs to the web, I love learning about it and love sharing that information about it. So these are all different communities जहाँ पे मैं participate कर रहा हूँ, either speaking or organizing events and stuff like that. So I'm very happy that I've got to be part of this meetup as well. So before we can start with what micro-frontends are, we want to first understand the problem. What is the problem we're trying to solve over here? So micro-frontends are an extension of microservices. That's the first point. So जब microservices में भी यहाँ पे कितने लोग microservices को use कर रहे हैं अभी? Just a show of hands. कम लोग use कर रहे हैं. So the basic premise of microservices was quite a few things, but उनमें से मैं 3 चीज़ों को pick करूँगा. और effectively the whole point was कि आपका जब code base है, अब हम लोग अगर traditional backends को program करते हैं, तो they become so big कि at some point they become unmanageable. कि उनको कोई एक बंदा जो है वो पूरी code base को own नहीं कर सकता because it's so big. So the alternative was to decompose your architecture into smaller pieces so that आप उसको फिर समझ सकें कि हाँ यार ये मेरा एक component है, ये मेरी एक service है, इसको मैं इस scope के अंदर समझ सकता हूँ. And Ali bhai, please अगर मैं कुछ गलत कहूँ तो मैं correct कर दीजिएगा please. So effectively the basic premise of microservices was to decompose your architecture, उसको थोड़े services में create करें और इसमें then you get certain advantages. You get to work autonomously. आप अपनी service को एक अपनी टीम में काम करें, अगर साथ वाली एक और सर्विस उसमें जो काम करी, you don't need to directly know what they're doing and how they're doing it. You get to choose your own technology. इसके भी थोड़ा सा बात करेंगे. And I feel one of the most important things that it brought in was you could release faster. Faster का मतलब ये है कि अगर for example अगर मेरे पास बहुत बड़ा monolith है जिसको मैं सिर्फ एक महीने में एक दफा release कर सकता हूँ, with microservices I am forced to automate it everything, तो मैं जल्द से जल्द ज़्यादा releases कर सकता हूँ. And this was again very important because again if your services are properly defined, तो आपको you don't have to wait for the services to release. तो ये सारी चीजें microservices में आई, and this was predominantly on the back end. Our front end has not really changed and hasn't really been updated since then. So if you look at the journey over time that we've seen, originally we had the monolith, जिसमें हमारे front end and back end code एक साथ serve हो रहा होता था. We still have that, and again, there's nothing wrong with that. कुछ projects के लिए that's probably the perfect architecture to use. But as the backend and frontend grew, we came to a point where we realized, yeah, we need some concerns of separation, and that's where we split our frontend and backend code bases. Backend keep going, क्योंकि वो applications बड़े से बड़े हो जाते हैं. And we soon realized that we need to decompose our backends even further, and thus the whole concept of microservices came in. And microservices, we broke our backend into smaller services. मगर what we didn't do in our microservice architecture was we didn't change the front end. हम लोगों ने इस front end को एक aggregation layer से expose तो कर दिया, but we're still developing it as a single unit. The major reason for doing this is very simple. क्योंकि unlike our microservices जो backend में independently run हो सकती हैं, आपका front end जो है वो आपकी front end की services अगर आप उनको decompose करते हैं वो independently run नहीं हो सकते. They all need to land on the same page eventually and they all need to run together. And this is one of the reasons that has been जिसकी वजह से भी वो hesitant था. अभी we haven't moved on to this yet. So the idea was that you essentially decompose your front end और आप उसको back end के साथ sync कर लें. So if you have a team, for example, working on your checkout page, then you have the complete flow. Front end checkout के page वो team देख रही हो, back end भी उसका देख रही हो, उसका database भी देख रही हो. And if you decompose your team like this into a vertical team, तो उसमें आपको advantage ये मिलेगा कि you get a very focused team and उसमें आपके जो code base है वो भी automatically isolate हो जाती है. So we already talked about this a bit. Why is this vertical teams better? Why are we trying to break our major front end into smaller pieces? Sustain the pace, right? At the end of the day, जो सारा हम लोग काम कर रहे होते हैं, that's related to the business side of it, right? And business में we need to deliver the product. अगर हमारे पास एक बहुत ही giant code base है जिसको मैं जब भी मैं कोई चीज छेड़ता हूँ मुझे डर लगता है यार मैं ये छेड़ूंगा तो वो टूट जाएगा, तो that just slows us down. तो अगर मैंने अपनी pace sustain करनी है, and when I say sustain the pace, I'm actually talking about when you start the project, you start a project with a certain pace. ठीक है ना? अगर स्टार डेवलपर होंगे आप फीचर्स निकाल रहे होंगे, हर रोज फीचर निकाल रहे होंगे, बट ओवर टाइम व्हेन दैट कोड बेस ग्रोज और लोग आएंगे, दैट पेस इज गोइंग टू स्लो डाउन. सो इफ यू वांट टू सस्टेन द पेस, दिस इज एन ऑप्शन व्हाट यू कैन यूज कि आप उसको अपने कोड को ब्रेक डाउन कर सकते हैं. सेकेंड एडवांटेज वी अगेन टॉक्ड अबाउट कि वी कैन इफेक्टिवली रीजन अबाउट आवर कोड बेस, कि हम लोग उस कोड को देख सकते हैं, हम समझ सकते हैं अच्छा हाँ यार ये कोई मेरा चेकआउट का पेज है, मैं एक बंदा जाके उसको बैठ के देख सकता है एंड कहता है अच्छा यार दिस इज माय सर्विस एंड दिस इज द बाउंडेड कॉन्टेक्स्ट व्हिच इट एग्जिस्ट इन. एक यूजफुल फायदा इसका ये है कि हमें एक जो टीम है वो एक ही चीज पे फोकस करती है, एंड इसमें जो सबसे बड़ा गैप आता है यूजुअली बड़े प्रोजेक्ट्स के अंदर वही आता है कि देयर आर फ्रंट एंड बैक एंड टीम्स, राइट? एंड इफ यू हैव अ सेपरेट फ्रंट एंड बैक एंड टीम दे नीड टू कम्युनिकेट वेरी इफेक्टिवली in terms of interfaces and the interaction that's happening. And that's where a lot of the problems come in. But if your team is just focused end to end on a single feature, it just makes it easier to work with. We can deploy on our own schedule. Of course, now we're no longer tied to the order team or the search team. So if as a checkout team, I can just go ahead and deploy whenever I've done my feature work. And I've mentioned this communication overhead is decreased within the team, but it has increased across the teams. ठीक है ना? So and we'll talk about how that impacts the project and उसमें complications आती हैं. How do we go about fixing them? So that was one of the reasons why we wanted to use micro-frontends. But I had a slightly different perspective. For me, micro-frontends were interesting because I've seen over the last 10 years technology evolve. I started using jQuery के बाद Backbone, उसके बाद AngularJS, उसके बाद Angular. Nowadays I'm using React. At each stage, I understood that if I wanted to transform from one technology to the other, I had to most probably rewrite my code base. उसमें there wasn't really any option for transitioning. And for me, I can see right now, being a lot in the front end space, that web components are probably going to take over in the next 2 years. Maybe not. We get to see that, but I believe that web components will take over. And my thinking is the product that I'm building today, can I start designing it already in a way that जब 2 साल बाद web components do take over, can I start incorporating web components side by side React that I'm already using? And I can over time फिर web components को भी use करूँ, React को भी use करूँ, and React को phase out कर दूँ application से and leave web components behind and transition my code base over and over again. So it's all about reusability and trying to create something that's useful. So we've looked into why we need micro frontends. Now we can start looking into what micro frontends are. So I'll enforce this again, because micro-frontends is currently a very hyped term. When you first read about it, you get very excited and you're like, yaar, nahi, ye to bhi implement karne hai maine. I want to use React and Angular side by side. But that's not the purpose of this. And the overhead is significant. So if you're designing a monolith, it's not a bad thing. Really think hard about your design decision before actually taking it. दूसरी चीज that's very important is that the whole concept of micro-frontends is not new. These terms are all referring to micro-frontends and they have existed for the last few decades. Verticalized themes, self-contained systems, vertical decomposition, UI composition, these are all things that are happening within micro-frontends. These are not new concepts, but just bring them all together and executing them this way, this is what micro-frontends is all about. Speaking of things not new, and हम लोग अभी इस introduction में ही बात कर रहे थे, so a lot of the things that you hear about today, including microservices, agile and whatnot, these are not things that have come in the last 10 years. These have existed over the last 30, 40 years actually. And there's this lovely talk on YouTube by Kevlin Henney. He's a guy who writes on software architecture and talks about it. And he talks about how all of these concepts were actually from the 1970s. And his purpose of the talk is to encourage us to go back, actually read the perspectives of what the original creators thought when they were, what kind of problems they were running into when they were trying to create solutions to these problems, just to get a better understanding of what they are. So we reach our micro-frontend implementation. What is a micro-frontend? Micro-frontend के अंदर there are two concepts on the web that you will find. One concept is कि हमारे पास एक front-end application है और उसके अंदर हमारे पास multiple routes हैं. I go on /search, my search page opens. I go on /order, order opens. I go on /checkout, the checkout opens. And each of these routes loads a new app, and that is my microservice app. उसके अंदर issue ये होगा कि जब मैं अपने order से checkout पे जाऊँगा, that will require a page reload because it's a new app, and that is not what I'm interested in because that kind of breaks the UI. But that is a valid microservice, a micro frontend, and you can definitely explore that if that's what you need effectively. What here I'm going to talk about today is specifically composing multiple services and then composing those UIs on a single page. And this is how it looks like. So you have 3 teams working on a single product. You have one team that's called the team product that's actually controlling the whole layout and the flow, the product itself. Then you have the team checkout that is focused on just the checkout experience, that is the buy button and the basket. And then you have the team inspire that's going to work on the recommendation engine for this product, and उसका जो result है वो यहाँ पे show हो रहा है. So they've added like 3 different technologies to it just for fun, but normally you'd not be doing that. You'd not want to use Angular and React and Vue.js at the same time, but the idea is that you can if you want to. So what are some of the ideas that we are looking for on micro frontend? We're following them up from microservices. We obviously want flexibility in our technology choice. Again, we don't want to choose completely separate frameworks, Angular and React. Instead, within, let's say if I've chosen React, I would want flexibility. Let's say one team wants to use TypeScript, go for it. One team wants to use Flow, go for it. One team wants to use a different build system, maybe Webpack, maybe something else. So they have their own choices and they can make that and they can run with it as long as at build time everything comes together, right? And how will that come together? We'll talk about that in a bit. Isolate team code, establish team prefixes. Now this was important because effectively, as we started talking in the start, कि हमारा सारा code जो है that's going to be running on the same page. So it's very easy for me to have an item over here and an item component over here. And if I don't prefix them properly, then if one of these blows up, I don't know which one has. And this is going to happen in JavaScript and in CSS. So team prefixing is actually very important. Favor native browser features, and this is again, we're all talking about how do you bring it down to the core level. What is the lowest level on which I can build my application, and that is the native browser feature. अगर मैं React router use कर रहा हूँ और मैं Angular router use कर रहा हूँ, the probability that they are going to be compatible is close to zero. It's going to be very hard for them to work together. But if I'm working on a window.location level, no problem. And finally, this is again a property of microservices that you want to build resilience in your application. So essentially, if one of your component fails, your whole website still keeps working. Agar my recommendations component is not working, I can still go about and check out from my application if I want to. These are some of the problems that are related to micro-frontends, and we'll be touching base on a few of them as we go down this talk. And these are some of the companies that are using micro-frontends. Now, the important thing to understand is, this is still not a defined standard. Like, unlike microservices, जिसमें now we have certain things, established concepts, micro-frontends are still very new. So everybody is doing it in a slightly different way. There are some companies like IKEA who are strictly looking at it from a static website perspective. They're just building their static front ends using micro-frontends, which is interesting. Then there are other companies who are like Upwork who are actually using them for their spa. So how do we go around building a micro-frontend? Again, slight warning that these are not the only, so I'm going to talk about two different ways, and these are not the only two different ways for building micro-frontends. You can have many other ways that you'll find on the web, and I've actually added some links at the end for those who are interested to explore this. So what's our objective? We've already talked about this. The idea is that we have microservices and then their corresponding micro-frontends on top, and we want to compose these micro-frontends into a stitching layer that our user will be accessing. This is the objective for all of our targets. So the first way we can do it is using the DOM as the API. What does that mean? That means that we use the lowest level unit that we have available, that is custom elements. यहाँ पे कितने लोगों ने custom elements का सुना हुआ है? Show of hands. Custom elements, web components. Okay, nobody has heard of them. ठीक है. So web components are effectively a spec that is now being adopted by browsers, and effectively उसमें what you get is you use the React library to create components. What if you didn't have to use the React library? What if it was embedded in your browser, right? So web components is that specification. It's a specification for creating native browser level components, right? And web components come with quite a few different technologies, including shadow DOM and template injection and stuff like that. But the idea is to use that as your build target, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're using Vue.js, it doesn't matter whether you're using Angular, it doesn't matter if you're using whatever. As long as it can compile down to the DOM, to custom elements, we can use that, right? And you can have multiple teams compiling it down to custom elements, and then you can ship your product as a single whole. So in this particular case, how does this look like? We have the same example as before, and we have the product team that owns the page, and this is the base layer, this is your layout. And then you have two other teams that are providing fragments. Fragments is essentially components, right? So हमारे जो recommendation team ने एक हमारे component बना के expose कर दिया, and we know that this is now available to us. And our team checkout did the same. It exposed two components. So all the product team has to do is to bring it in and include it in its layout. उसको नहीं पता कि इसके अंदर क्या हो रहा है. All it knows is कि ये component है, मुझे इसको यहाँ place करना है, and it will just come and place it over here. इसकी जो functionality है, that is controlled by their respective teams. So when you do something like this, effectively उसमें फायदा ये होता है आपको कि your stitching layer becomes very simplified. All you have to do is compile to JavaScript, and as long as you're using custom elements and its related stack, you are going to, it's all going to work out. It's all going to work very fine. The bad part is custom elements are still pretty new, so there's limited browser support for this, and one of the things that you need to think about again is things like your router, right? So if you're building a single page application, you will have a router, and how do you create a general router for all the different libraries that you're using? So अगर for example मैं React use कर रहा हूँ, अपने एक team के अंदर, and the other team is using Angular, how do those two routers talk, right? So you actually have, the product team has to create the router and include the components for them. So they're actually managing the routing in the end. The worst, the thing that didn't work for me was that you can't use the strategy if you're already building something. So let's say I have a React code base. I can't use a strategy because I have to now export everything as a custom element, right? And that's going to break almost everything because because the behavior of a custom element and my React elements are going to be slightly different, right? So effectively, you can't use a strategy if you already have a code base that you've been working on. And the thing that actually kind of made me stop looking into this particular way was the fact that React does not have complete capability of exporting to web components. So it does support web components, but none of the advanced tests are working on there. They might start working again soon in the future, but React essentially likes to think of it as an alternative to web components rather than supporting web components. So there's a chance that might not happen. The second option is, and this is, there's a company in UK called ThoughtWorks, which is where Martin Fowler works, and they have been using micro-frontends for the last 2 years, and they came up with a very interesting approach that I thought was very useful. So I'm going to share pieces of that. I've got the YouTube links here in case anybody else wants to see them as well. But effectively, this is just the gist of all the talks that I found, all the documentation I found in this. So for them, React was the base, the base that they were using for all their projects. But what they wanted was the flexibility in terms of, like I mentioned, hey, one team wants to use TypeScript, now they can use that. The other team wants to use Flow, one team wants to use something else, a different build system, SaaS, less, whatever. It doesn't really make a difference because now each team is now isolated, and now when they bring their code together, it all becomes, it all turns into JavaScript and CSS effectively. The best thing about this approach is things like router are simplified because now they can just adopt something like the React router and they don't have to think about it. State management ke liye they're using Redux. So they're using the standard React toolchain for most of the things that need to be shared across all the teams. So how does this work? This essentially works by introducing something called the frame. Now this frame is not a technical terminology, this is something this is the name they gave to this piece of code that lives, and this is essentially the stitching layer, right? So you have these different teams that are working on different applications, different parts of that application, and you have two options for deploying this frame to your front end. This frame contains references to all the services that are available in your app, and this frame also, in their particular case, contains the layout. So the nav bar, the basic sidebars and stuff, वो सारा frame के अंदर रहता है. The way the option 1 works for deployment is that you use a package registry to push your code. So in this case, it's going to be npm since all of it is JavaScript. And then whenever you push something into npm, you build this frame JS bundle, and then you deploy that into your application. The obvious advantage of this is that if all the complexity is on my server side, I build it once, and then I ship my bundle down to the client side. It's all composed together, well and good. Everything is nice. The two disadvantages are over here. So whenever let's say I deploy my search, I'm going to make two deployments. I first have to deploy my search to package registry, and then that will deploy my frame to the app server. So there's a dependency here that's not very good. The second option, the second problem is that our single frame bundle that is created can become very big because we can only ship a single bundle. We're trying to build everything into that one bundle. We don't know what the client really needs. Is he on the search page? Is he on what page? So this becomes a slight challenge if you try building everything on the server. So the alternative is to build everything on the client, and effectively this allows us again more independent builds. So effectively when I push my order or search JS, this is the only thing that needs refreshed on the client side. And effectively, Frame.js still works the same way. All it does is, all it knows about is all of these different services. And when my app initializes, it's literally a list, and it runs through them and includes the components as required, and it's just going to lazy load what's needed on our client side. Since it's using lazy load, that means that I only get to load what I need on the front end. The disadvantage is obviously because now I have to first load my Frame.js and then I load my application. So the overall speed of the loading time becomes slow. Now you have to choose between having a bigger bundle or having a smaller bundle but having more calls going to the server. This is like a small example I took from one of the slides they shared, where they were showing how this is React code, and within React they're just using these this list of all the components that they have, all the different services from a different parts of the application, and effectively when the page renders, they all get initialized and they start working. So once you've got these different teams working on this one application, the first thing that you're going to start thinking about is how do you share application state, right? Because when you're working on a single page application, you have multiple components in view, and all of them need to be synced in a particular state. All of them will have their own state, and they also need to have a shared state. So for their own state, they are using Redux, or you could also use MobX. There's nothing wrong with that. These are just state management libraries that are used in the front end. So you have the Frame.js that contains the global store, and inside that each service has its own substore. What you don't want to do is you don't want to share substores, because that will defeat the whole purpose of isolation. So you have this concept of actions in Redux, and you also want to make sure all your actions are namespaced so that there's no conflict. When you want to share information across substores, what you do is you share data by sending events on the frame. So let's say my search page wants to know, my recommendation service wants to know what the user just searched for, so I can show relevant results. So my recommendation service will effectively listen to my search event. Whenever that's triggered, it will get the data, this is what was searched for, and then it will render the recommendations accordingly. So this essentially isolates all of my components, all of my services very nicely, and I don't have anything being shared together. There is another way of doing this, and that is by moving the application state over to the back end, which is a bit uncommon now, because we try to keep our back end stateless, but you can always sync your components using the back end route as well. One of the other issues one of the big things that is being shared on the front end is the design. And with design, you come up with two different problems. The first problem is design consistency. And essentially design consistency is all about, you have 4 teams working, and how do you make sure that if somebody writes a CSS, it's not going to conflict with somebody else's CSS on the same page. I talked about having an item. So you can have an item in one component and have the same item class in another component. How do you ensure that they are properly scoped? There's a concept for CSS modules. This is again a new spec that most of the browsers now support. Effectively, what this does is it adds a hash in front of your class. So it's a unique hash for each component, so that whenever it applies the style on that class, it's going to be just affecting that component and nothing else in your view. And then you come about the second issue, and that's the UX decision. How do you make sure that जो styling कर रहे हैं वो consistently कर रहे हैं? Are all our selects looking the right way? Are our forms looking the proper way? So for that, you create a style guide, and you make sure everyone copy pastes from that style guide. So then you're good to go. But then there's this whole issue with the overall UX, right? मेरे पास एक व्यू हो सकता है जहाँ पे साइड बार साइड पे हो, दूसरा व्यू हो सकता है जहाँ पे साइड बार नीचे हो, like you have a nav bar that's down. So how do you make sure that your overall app design consistency is there? Because now your teams are not communicating that much across, right? एक team तो अपने अंदर बहुत सी communication कर रही है, but if you have 4 teams, they're not communicating between themselves that much कि वो अपने सारी UX decisions को align कर सकें. So the idea over here is to use a design guild, and design guild is effectively 2 or 3 people in the whole team, across all teams, who essentially champion the design part. They said, "Acha, we're going to make sure that all the screens in this application look correct." So, and if they do see any issues at any point, at any deployment, they can go and raise concerns with the team. For example, sidebar डाला है, that doesn't look correct. So you may want to use this other style that we're using everywhere else. And finally, we have the testing strategy. Unit tests are going to be simple. If you have an isolated piece of code, you just run the unit tests on that. Integration tests are a lot harder now because effectively each team is not running its own, it's not running the full application when they're developing, right? They're just running their own service. So the way they do is, okay, they actually, your frame.js supports 2 modes. You can have a development mode जहाँ पे सिर्फ आपका अपनी service चल रही होगी और बाकी सारे components ignore हो रहे होंगे. And then you have your production mode जिसके अंदर वो सारे components को compose करके वो run करता है. So whenever they run integration tests, they actually run them in the composed version, so that you run it across all the services. The obvious problem is कि अगर मैं checkout की team में हूँ and now I'm writing functional tests, how do I ensure कि मेरे tests सिर्फ checkout के ऊपर हैं, right? Because now I've composed everything. And this is one of the things that they struggle with, and this is something that they have to be very, very careful about. कि हर team जो अपने functional test लिख रही है, so they have to make sure that they're only testing the functionality that they've written, their components, not any other teams, right? So you have to make sure that the consistency remains, the isolation remains, because if you start overlapping isolation, then there's no particular point of doing this. One of the advantages, one of the things that they're using was consumer-driven contracts, which is effectively, it's a testing strategy where you define a contract with your backend, and your front end knows what to expect, and then you make sure that the backend is actually sending that, right? So when you have communications happening, this is usually used in microservices between different services to make sure that अच्छा इसने ये चीज़ में भेजनी है तो इस तरह से भेजेगा, and so you know, so you can adopt the same strategy in the front end as well. Final thoughts. So after all these months that I've been looking into this, we need to focus when we're building micro-frontends. We need to focus on the actual objective. So before starting on this journey, do we really need it, right? Does my project really need micro-frontends? And if all of the advantages really outweigh the overhead that we're getting, then yes, we should move forward with that. Bounded context is the most important thing in microservices, I would assume, and this is true for micro-frontends as well. If you don't, if your context is not separated properly, what you're going to get is a distributed monolith, pretty much, nothing else. So you're not getting any advantage there. Final recommendation is that you should really tread cautiously when using this pattern, because again, this is not yet adopted fully in the community, so everybody is doing their own things. There's a lot of learning. There's a lot of research going around here. So we would expect this to evolve. There are some beginnings of some documentation on microfrontends.org. It's very basic. They don't have even things like navigation covered into that. But over time, this is the space to watch over time and maybe learn from as we're going ahead. Some of the resources that I was also looking at when I was doing my research. So you guys can have a look over here as well. And that was it from my side. Thank you. I'm not. So at this stage, I was just trying to understand what this is and.
कॉन्टेक्ट जब आप ड्रॉ करते हैं तो साथ में कॉन्टेक्ट नया दिया आप आपके काउंट लेती एक कॉन्टेक्ट कॉन्टेक्ट आप कहते हैं एवरीथिंग ऑफ वही कॉन्टेक्ट वही जो टीम बना रही है वो भी टीम का पार्ट है, वो टीम जो है वो सर्विसेज जो है वो क्रिएट कर रही है, क्रिएट कर रही है तो वही उसके कंटेंट दे रही है, उसका वेट एक बैकेंड से बना रही है। अब जब बैकेंड को बना, बैकेंड बन गया, फ्रंट एंड बन गया, और सारे जो है वो आपने कॉन्टेक्ट कॉन्टेक्ट बना दिया, आपने 7 या 8 कॉन्टेक्ट कॉन्टेक्ट ड्रॉ कर दिया, आपने यहाँ एडिशन जो है 7 या 8 मैट्रिक्स जो है क्रिएट करने के लिए जा रहा है, बहुत देखिए लेकिन कॉन्टेक्ट कॉन्टेक्ट 6 और 7 आपने कॉन्टेक्ट कॉन्टेक्ट ड्रॉ कर दिया। चैलेंजेस, अगर सब लोग डिफरेंट यूआई के ऊपर काम करें और वी आर गोइंग टू इम्पैक्ट सेपरेट यूआई को वापस से किस तरीके से फाइल होगी एक पेज के ऊपर, सिंगल पेज पे किस तरीके से डिस्प्ले होगी। माइक्रो फ्रंट एंड आपके जॉबों को रिजॉल्व करके देता है। इम्पॉर्टेंट है जो इस पूरी एक्सरसाइज के अंदर जो हमने की ऑलमोस्ट 1 महीना तकरीबन दोनों की हमारे बच्चे के ऊपर रही, उसके ऊपर हमने फोकस किया बहुत ज़्यादा। डिज़ाइन सिस्टम कौन सा यूज करना चाहिए, यहाँ पर जीआई वाले बहुत सारे लोग नहीं हैं, बट ऐसा अंडरस्टैंड कि डिज़ाइन सिस्टम हमारे पास कौन सा है, गूगल पर बहुत सारी एक्सप्रेस। So, I can say this, what technology we are doing. आप पॉलीग्लॉट से काम कर सकते हैं, ये लाइब्रेरीज अवेलेबल है, आप किसी को भी जो किसी भी फ्रेमवर्क को जो यूज कर सकते हैं। बट बहुत अच्छा है माइक्रो सर्विसेज, मालूम सकते हैं पॉलीग्लॉट है, ठीक है, बट देखिए आप बात आती है तो इंफेक्शन के अंदर वो आपको बहुत सारी चैलेंजेस फेस करने पड़ते हैं। जब आप इंफेक्ट करवाते डिफरेंट वो कॉम्पोनेंट्स के दरमियान, डिफरेंट माइक्रो सर्विसेज के दरमियान, तो जो माइक्रो फ्रंट इसके लिए जो आपको बेसिक एरिया तो आप लोग करें एक टेक्नोलॉजी जो आपको फाइनल कर लें, ये जो आपको लर्न कर लें, लर्न कर लें, टाइम जो फिर वो टेक्नोलॉजी अपने सिर्फ फाउंडर कॉन्टेक्ट एग्जॉस्टिक जब दूर कह सकते हैं, देखिए आपके पास अकेले आपकी एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के अंदर इतनी बड़ी टीम है,